Good morning, one and all.
Before sir, Ali.
Good morning, one and all. Jizamata Education Society, Arts, Commerce, Science College, Nandurbar. At first, on the behalf of our college, warmly welcome all the respectable delegates, resource person, and all the participants of today's national webinar. Jizamata Education Society always organize social welfare program by inspiration of our institution president Shobhatai More, secretary Dr. Abhijit More, and the vice president of Dr. Vikrant More. Today's national webinar is one of them. The title of the webinar is Disaster Risk Assessment. In this national webinar, we have invited chief guest B.V. Pawar sir, Pro Vice Chancellor of Acting KBC North Jalgaon, and the President of today's national webinar, Principal Dr. S.V. Devre sir, the chief guest as well as a resource person, Dr. K. Balasubramani. At first, may I request Dr. S.V. Devre sir, please astonish the goddess of enlighten the lamps and the flowers. May I request Dr. Principal S.V. Devre sir, please astonish the goddess of Saraswati.
Okay.
Sir. May I request Dr. S.V. Devre sir, please astonish the goddess of Saraswati.
Okay.
Welcome flowers and enlighten the lamp. Thank you, S.V. Devre sir. Now, may I request the keynote address of today's national webinar. Dr. H.M. Patil sir, please address your keynotes as a presidential about the national webinar disaster risk assessment. Please, Dr. H.M. Patil sir.
अरे सर थोडा आपण वेट करायला पाहिजे अजून लोक जॉईन झालेले नव्हते
हा बालसुब्रमण्य सर येत आहेत 5 मिनिटात.
Sir, I have joined.
Yes,
हा,
welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Once again, may I welcome all the persons, chief guests, and all the participants of this national webinar. May I request Dr. H.M. Patil sir, please start.
Yes, I am here. Yes, I am here, but just wait 2 to 3 minutes. So people are joining.
Okay, thank you, sir.
H.M. Patil sir.
बरेच जॉईन बाकी आहेत.
स्टार्ट करूया का?
H.M. Patil sir, please continue.
Okay. Shall I start now?
Yes, sir. Okay,
Okay.
start.
Okay. I request all participants to mute their mic. Disturbance is there. I request all the okay. Respected Principal Dr. S.V. Devre sir, Chairman of today's webinar. Respected Honorable Chief Guest Dr. B.V. Pawar sir, resource person of today's webinar, Dr. A. Balasubramani, organizing committee members and my colleagues.
This is my Minecraft house, Papa.
Dr. C.V. Nandre, Professor V.N. Khandare, Dr. D.V. Sonone, and all the participants. A very good morning to one and all. I am happy to welcome you all for this one-day national webinar on disaster risk assessment conducted by our college. Conducting such a programs is a useful way of Jijamata College taking the responsibility of higher education for benefiting the students, community in particular, and public in general. I am very happy and proud to say that this is our fourth webinar in this academic year conducted under the leadership of our principal, Dr. S.V. Devre. We have conducted 2 national webinars and 1 international webinar. The international webinar was conducted on Delta plus variant of COVID-19. Our NSS students and faculty always take part in helping the people whenever the disaster comes, but they are not familiar with the risks involved in this disaster. The objective of this webinar, there is a lot of disturbance. There is a lot of disturbance. Please ask the participants to mute their mics. The objective of this webinar is to give a brief introduction to the qualitative and quantitative approach to determine the nature and extent of disaster risks by analyzing potential hazards and evaluating existing conditions of exposure and vulnerability that together could harm people, property, services, livelihoods, and the environment on which they depend. We have chosen the right person, that Dr. K. Bal Subramaniam here to address all these issues. I welcome him on behalf of all of us. Impacts from natural disasters are on the rise around the world. Hurricanes, droughts, floods, cyclones, earthquakes pose a growing threat to the economies and the lives of millions. Global disaster losses have risen sharply from over the last few decades. The poor are suffering the most over the last few years. The preparedness and resilience can keep these natural hazards from becoming human catastrophes. Disaster risk is evolving rapidly in today's world. To know where and how to make investment before a disaster strikes to us, we need to be able to identify risk rapidly, rigorously, and regularly from individuals and communities. Understanding disaster risk is everyone's business. We can make the use of technology to gather the information about the hazards and understand the pattern of it. We don't have to be a disaster expert. We can all help better understand our risks and make steps towards lasting resilience. The webinar will look at the various risks involved in any kind of disaster and possible remedies to overcome these. I request all the participants to use this webinar well and get benefited in maximum extent. I am thankful to all of you to introduce this webinar. Thanking you, sir. Thank you.
In their presidential address, introduce about how Jijamata Education Society had been doing such a welfare program organized and enlightened, has highlighted the different issues at the national as well as international level regarding the socio-economic problems too. Now, may I request Dr. Sivi Nandre sir, please introduce our chief guest. Request Dr. Sivi Nandre sir, please introduce today's our chief guest. Dr. Nandre.
Am I audible?
Introduce about today's our chief guest.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, you are-
म्यूट करो बाकी था ना
I request all participants to mute their mics. Good morning to one and all. I welcome all the guests and participants on the behalf of Jizamata Education Society's Arts, Science, Commerce College, Nandurbar. Moving ahead, I will quickly introduce our today's guest. Our chief guest, Professor B.V. Pawar, has done B in production, MSc in computer science, and PhD in computer science. His field of specialization is natural language processing, database management system, machine translation, web technologies, etc. At present, he is working as an official vice chancellor, senior professor, and head at Bainawai Chowdhury, North Maharashtra University, Jalgaon. He holds an overall experience of 31.5 years in teaching, research, and administration. He has published 81 research papers in referred journals and also presented 117 research papers in national and international conferences. 14 students has completed PhD and 1 student has completed MPhil under his supervision. He has received a research and development grant. Total work RS 4.75 crore. He has worked as ex-US members at different universities: KBC, NMU, Jalgaon, Mumbai University, Mumbai, Savitribai Phule, Pune University, Pune, Babasaheb Ambedkar Maratha University, Aurangabad, Gulbarga University, Karnataka. He has also worked as ex-RRC chairman or member at different universities like KBC, NMU, Jalgaon, Mumbai University, Mumbai, Savitribai Phule University, Pune, Shivaji University, Kolhapur, MGI Hindi Vishwavidyalaya, Wardha. He has worked as ex-dean faculty of science at North Maharashtra University, Jalgaon. Is an ex-member of Managing Council from 2006 to 2011. Worked as officiating registrar from 18th November 2019 to 14th March 2021. This is just a brief introduction of Professor B.V. Pawar. We will definitely get to know more about him by the end of this session. Now moving to our new guest of today's webinar, our resource person, Dr. Bala Subramanian. He has done MSc in Geography, PhD in Geography, and postdoctoral research. At present, he is working as an assistant professor at Central University of Tamil Nadu, Tiruvallur, India. Sir has published his books, research articles, and journals in several publications. Sir has presented research papers in several national and international conferences and has received appreciation. He is affectionate with collaborative work and interdisciplinary. His field of specialization is watershed modeling and sustainable land and planning, integrated disaster risk assessments, river basin dynamics and landscape evaluation, detailed statistics and modeling of environmental and health data set. With this, I would like to finish up introduction of our honorable guest and request to proceed further. Thank you. Thank you. Over to Desai sir.
Khandare sir.
देसाई सर अनम्यूट करा तुम्ही.
Khandare sir, please you mute the participants whose mics are open. There are number of participants whose mics are open and they are producing a lot of disturbance.
Now we we have with us renowned person, ABC North Master University, Belgaum. May I request Dr. B. Pawar sir, please, without wasting our valuable time, please address your valuable addressing to our participants of this national webinar. Dr. B. Pawar sir.
Thank you, sir. A very good morning to all. Friends, I am very delighted to be here at Jijamata Education Society's Arts, Commerce and Science College, Nandurbar this morning at the inaugural function of national level one-day webinar on disaster risk assessment organized by IQAC, NSS and Student Development Department of this college. At the outset, I must compliment Chairman and honorable members of the management of the Jijamata Education Society, and then Principal Dr. S.V. Devre, and entire organizing team for envisioning a very relevant theme for this webinar. And as an inaugurator of this webinar, I declared that this webinar on disaster risk assessment is inaugurated and open. I must also express my deepest appreciation to the resource person, Dr. K. Balasubramani, from Central University of Tamil Nadu, Thiruvarar, and all the delegates who are present online for this webinar. Webinars such as this bring all of us together, giving an opportunity by providing a platform to share and express our views and thoughts on the theme of webinar amongst ourselves. As you all know, India is known worldwide for its skilled human resources, and organizing such events is necessary to sharpen the skills and knowledge sets of our human resources. This one-day webinar is a stage for all of us to contribute to this activity organized by Jijamata Education Society's Arts, Science and Commerce College, Nandurbar, by being an active participant in the invited talks. Friends, some of you might be knowing what disaster is. In general terms, we can say the disaster as a sudden or great misfortune, or simply we can say any unfortunate event. More precisely, we can say the disaster as an event whose timing is unexpected and whose consequences are seriously destructive. Disasters, we can classify them as natural, man-made and hybrid disasters. And it is believed that all the disasters can be of these three types only. Natural disasters, as you all might be knowing, these are caused due to the different reasons like soil erosion, seismic activity, tectonic movements, air pressure, and ocean currents, etc. Natural activities taking place in the Earth's crust as well as surface are the main reasons for these disasters. Disasters may be explosions, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, or fires. In the disaster, you may face a danger of death or physical injury. You may also lose your home, possessions, and community. Such stressors place you at the risk of emotional and physical health problems. Natural disasters, as most of you might be knowing, they can cause destruction of your property, loss of financial resources, and personal injury or illness. The loss of resources, security, and access to the shelter can lead to the massive population migrations in the lesser developed countries. Hence, the disaster risk assessment is very necessary because of all these reasons. Disaster risk assessment is a process to determine the nature and extent of such a risk. By analyzing hazards and evaluating existing conditions of vulnerabilities, and together could potentially harm, expose the people's property, services, livelihoods, and the environment on which they depend. In this way, informed decisions can be made regarding the steps to reduce the impact of disasters. Friends, a comprehensive risk assessment not only evaluates the magnitude and likelihood of potential losses in case of disaster, but also provide full understanding of the causes and impact of the losses. Disaster risk assessment is an integral part of decision-making process. It is therefore needed to engage the multi-stakeholders from the various disciplines and requires a close cooperation and collaboration of different organizations and institutions of the target area. And hence, the disaster risk assessment is very necessary. And this risk assessment consists of 4 components or 4 steps: hazards assessment, vulnerability assessment, capacity assessment, and people's perception of the risk. Friends, as an inaugurator, what I had mentioned is in the last few minutes, it's just an introduction to the disaster and why disaster risk assessment is required and what is disaster risk assessment. Our resource person, Professor Bal Subramani, will be throwing more light in detail on in his speech on these particular topics. And I hope that the deliberations by the resource persons would be very useful and fruitful for the audience who are present online today. And I wish my best wishes to this webinar, and thanks to the principal of the college for inviting me to inaugurate the webinar and given an opportunity to talk to you. And with this, I once again I once again give best wishes to this particular webinar, and I thank all the online presenters who are present online for patient listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Desai sir, please continue.
देसाई सर अनम्यूट करा तुमचं माइक. प्लीज अनम्यूट युअर माइक देसाई सर.
देसाई सर आवाज जात नाही.
Thank you, Dr. B.V. Pawar, sir. In shortly but very sweet and deepest knowledge, you have addressing and presenting your views and thoughts to our online webinar participants. Now, may I request the next, today our chief guest, Dr. K. Balasubramani, please address your valuable experience and thoughts and enlighten our all the online national webinar participants. May I request Dr. K. Balasubramani, please address your valuable keynotes of today's national webinar.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Yeah. So good morning. Good morning to all. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, especially principal of Jijamata Education Society, my favorite Sadish Devri sir, for providing me an opportunity to interact with young minds as well as learned people on disaster risk assessment. And I hope this college organizing series of webinar events very relevant to the society's need, as well as inculcate various information to the students in a brighter and like vibrant manner, which those services are very essential during this pandemic time. I also equally thank the chief guest of today's program, Dr. P.V. Pawar sir, for spending his valuable time with us, as well as Chandrakant Nandeyer sir, Hiralal Patil sir, and all other like colleagues. So your presence really boost up the young minds and facilitate us to do things more and better. Without taking time, I thought of starting my lecture. Shall I share my screen? I need a permission to share my screen.
Khandare sir, please share screen.
Co-host kara, co-host.
Yeah. Now it's, I got it. I hope my screen is visible now.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir. It is very much visible.
Yes.
So, shall I start? So this there is.
Yes,
Please,
sir.
sir. Please.
Please.
Okay. Thank you once again. I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity. This is maybe my 85th lecture and especially on disaster, I have delivered more than 30 lectures on the similar topic. Even the content also I am being updated, but almost retain the core. The idea behind taking this lecture to many institutes is to inculcate the life skills to these students, especially, as well as to give a comprehensive understanding about the disaster management or disaster risk assessment. Although it is a wider area and interdisciplinary as well as multidisciplinary area, but I am just focusing very fundamental concepts in disaster risk assessment, as well as I will give you some glimpse of geoinformatics, which can be used in a very vibrant manner for disaster risk assessment. So I am teaching disaster risk management to the students for the past 8 years, and I am providing consultancy to district administrations as well as state emergency planning departments on disaster management. Besides running projects on coastal disaster assessment and published few articles in reputed journals on disaster risk assessment. This is my exposure on disaster risk management or assessment. I hope you will get some new insights from this lecture. Some of you might know better about the disaster management. For them, then I kept how this geoinformatics applied to the managing natural or man-made disasters. The word disaster very familiar now, and even students can able to understand the intensity and magnitude of the word disaster. And even our today's chief guest, Pro Vice Chancellor sir, also mentioned very clearly about a disaster management and need of disaster management. And he also mentioned comprehensively about various types of disaster and the categories and so on. So I'm not going in very detail about defining the word disaster, but one thing is very important while say the word disaster, it is serious interruption. If any event, if any unexpected event seriously interrupt our society, our community, and creating a widespread losses, human, material, economic, and environmental losses, and we could thought of disaster. But this serious interruption and affecting community and creating loss will do by even accidents also. So for example, transport accidents, fire accidents, industrial accidents, whether all we call it as a disaster? No. When we say disaster, and definitely there should be a keyword that is called the serious interruption exceeds our ability. This is very important. So it is not that all events which create losses or impacts called disasters. Rather, the event that create losses even beyond our ability to control, that we call it as a disaster. Say for example, COVID-19. So we put all our scientific technological efforts, but still we could not able to control, we could not able to manage. Then we call it as pandemic, global pandemic, okay, which means the entire globe put the resources, but we could not able to control or contain it. Okay, this is a very good example for defining the word disaster. This is for a global disaster. But whereas if you take a village, in a village there is a river, that river is breached its course and flooded the hamlets or settlements. Whether we call it as a disaster or not, yes, because for village level they put all their effort, but they could not able to control or manage the breaching or flooding. So for that village, it is a disaster. Okay. If it is happened throughout the state and state put all its resources, could not able to control or contain, and for state it is a disaster. Then you know that certain disasters may cross border the state and affect, say for example, throughout the Western Ghats, you could find many like landslides due to heavy rainfall in a particular year. Then and the flood in a particular year, then you call it as national disaster, okay? Because entire nation like affected, or more than a state like being affected. Okay, it's like depend upon who exposed to a serious interruption event, what is their ability. Okay, these two will define the word disaster. Okay, it looked like very simple in terms of theoretical definition, but defining disaster on the ground, it's very difficult. Okay, and of course, it involving many political consequences as well. Say for example, Gujarat, Bhuj earthquake, if you take, it declared as a national disaster. Whether entire nation affected, no, but still the loss created is very huge, and it required money to like repair or like restore the city, okay, which required a national assistance. So for that per se, then the government of India declared as national disaster. Say for example, Uttarkasi flood considered as national disaster. Okay, whether entire like India affected, no, but still it require assistance at national level. It's like this 2004 tsunami. Okay, so these are all certain deviations from these theoretical definitions. Although a particular area being affected by a disaster, but we declared as a national level disaster because of the political or financial emergencies. Okay. So just to read the word disaster, it's not really a disaster. Okay. Disaster in practical, it is always determined based on the people's ability. Okay. That is very, very important. Say for example, in Canada, even 1 or 2 people died, they call it as a disaster because their population density is very less. Whereas in India, even certain accidents killed more than hundreds of people, but still we could not able to use the word disaster. So there are differences between the countries as well. All depend on the community who exposed to the disaster. Fine. Now I come to the word disaster risk. Disaster is real events, already happened events, whereas the disaster risk is the a future negative consequence or probability of an event that create a negative consequence in future. So whether what we have to manage it, whether disaster or disaster risk means, my answer would be directly to disaster risk, okay? Because disaster is already over. Whereas disaster risk is the encountering problem. So we have to put our efforts always towards disaster risk assessment or management rather than just speak about the historical events. Of course, the lessons learned from historical disasters very important to assess the future risk. When you want to assess the future risk, then you should understand the risk under 3 categories. Accordingly, we call it as vulnerability, hazard, and capacity. Vulnerability is our exposure, hazard is the event, and capacity is our ability. Okay, so these 3 normally determine the amount and magnitude of disaster risk. I just summarize these 3 in this a slide for easy understanding. Normally, this hazard, which is called as a dangerous phenomena, maybe a cyclone or earthquake or a drought or flood or a plane crash or a terrorist attack, whatever the phenomena that may cause a loss of life, injury or property damage, we call it as a hazard. Okay. But whereas vulnerability is our circumstance, our characteristics, okay, our systems, our exposure. Okay. This given hazard, how going to be a damage or affect our community? Okay. It's all depend on the exposure of community only. Say for example, you are in a 10th floor of a like apartment, then the flood level is just like 1 feet or 2 feet, you are not the worst sufferer. Rather, your like activities may be hindered, but still you could not find any like a loss of life or property damage. But the person who is exposing the ground floor, okay, where the water enter into his house and like inundate his valuable things, okay, and even like some of them like injured, then their like a circumstance and your circumstance where you are in upsize, it's different. Okay, so the hazard is the event and vulnerability is our exposure. Exposure vary from time to time and place to place. Like within a place, from like one level to another level, as you said, as I said, that between ground floor and top floor. Okay. Of course, if you have some 2 units of hazard and 2 units of vulnerability, your risk is 4 unit, no doubt about it, because you have both hazard as well as vulnerability. Okay. But if you have very good coping capacity, 4 units of coping capacity, your risk will be nullified. How? Say, for example, although I am in downside or in ground floor, water going to be enter into my house, but I protected the ways water enter into my house, or I aware about when the flood going to be enter into my like inundate my things. So accordingly, I like moved all my things and kept in safe place. I also like safeguard my vulnerable people, assets, and everything. And I am well prepared. And like for 2-3 days, I prepared all my food and everything, emergency, everything I prepared and packed. Now the flood enter into, I'm not affected anymore. I lose 2-3 days of my job, but still I am not losing any my like properties or people with me. And after flood, I came to the normal portions and I'm doing the routine work, which means that you have ability with your available skills, resources, you could be able to manage and face the adverse situation. Then your disaster risk will be nullified. Okay, so this hazard, you can't do anything. Say, for example, you can't control cyclone, you can't control earthquake. That definitely will happen. But what you can do, you can reduce your exposure, reduce your vulnerability. Exposure, I could not do it. Say, for example, it's very known that nearby the coastal, there are chances of getting cyclones and tsunamis. But the same like area providing me resources. I am a fisherman. I want to go to economic activity daily, then which means I have to locate myself very close to the coast. Okay. So your exposure is unavoidable and you are need to be there. Then your chances improve your coping capacity. Okay. So all governance should towards either reduce the exposure or improve the coping capacity. Okay. So that's why we are doing many plans, and even this lecture also it's in the one that case. Okay, so we have to aware ourselves where we are exposing, what's our resources, okay, whether it is really needed or not. If it is needed, what kind of dangers we may face in future. Okay, how can I safeguard? All the things you have to think it of. Say, for example, I am constructing a house in Himalayan terrain. Then I should not compare the construction of a plain terrain where multiple floor with the concrete structures may be suggested in a plain region where the condition is stable. But whereas in a Himalayan terrain, you are in a very fragile terrain, then you should not go for that. Rather, you should go for very flexible and very a small structure so that you can safeguard yourself. Okay, so it's not about a governance or a central government or state governments or global assistance required to manage disaster. Not like that. Rather, each one of us should think of, and in all our activities, we have to estimate our disaster risk, and accordingly, we have to act it. I just summarize what we learned so far. One side, you can see, yeah, river. This is actually a river, but water is outside river as well, which means that there is a flood. Okay. Normally, river is a resources. Resources become a flood, okay, or event. If this event happen in some interior like a forest, no people exposed, then no issue. We call it as a hazard alone. Okay. There is a hazard, that's all. But whereas if this river enter into the city, okay, and sufferer, say for example, the people poorly exposed, the poor people exposed to the flood become a victim. Okay. And this hazard now exposed or enter into the like a society, and there is interaction between hazard and like vulnerability, so you are getting a disaster risk or disaster. Okay. So if you want to manage or assess the disaster, you should assess both the things. You should assess the hazard as well as you should assess the society. Okay. Society, already I told, have a two like coins, two sides of the coins. Okay. One is vulnerability, another side is coping capacity. Both the things you have to assess. Then only you can able to like assess clearly the disaster. And of course, disaster is already happened events, but whereas risk is the future events. Okay. So we have to always try to manage our future events rather than still focusing on the past like historic events. This is just to like ensure your understanding. Say for example, here two rivers are there. One is in Siberia, another one is in Ganga Brahmaputra. Both are like a very big river and creating flood every year. You know that Brahmaputra flood, and even Lena like in Siberia also like known for flooding every year. All this like land area newly like established because of flooding every year. But here, this Lena River don't have any settlements, no settlements at all. But you know that the like Brahmaputra and Ganga Delta, especially Brahmaputra, which passes through the Bangladesh. Bangladesh is the country which have very high like population density, okay, more than 10,000 people per square kilometer. Okay. And whereas this is like less than 1. Okay, population density is less than 1, whereas this is population density is more than 10,000 per square kilometer, which means that here only hazard exists, whereas here both hazard as well as vulnerability exists. Even coping capacity also poor. So the risk in Ganga Brahmaputra Delta is very severe and high, and here is very less. Okay, so you should not always manage disaster in terms of hazard, rather in terms of people exposure, you have to manage it. So we have to consider severely both hazard and vulnerability. If you have less hazard and less vulnerability, our risk is low. But whereas if you have a more vulnerability and more hazard, our risk is high, like Ganga Brahmaputra Delta. But of course, certain areas you have only hazard, okay, but vulnerability is less. Say for example, like Lena, which will fall under like medium risk. Certain areas you have a high population densities, but the chances of getting hazard is like hazard is low, so it become medium. So this is just like example and indicative, but the scale is continuous. Okay, there is a from like a low to there is a severe or extreme like a risk. In between, all our like risk will fall. So we have to like assess ourselves. Okay, what is our like risk, whether we are here or here or here. Okay, based on hazard and vulnerability. Again, hazards are multiple, vulnerabilities are multiple. That is also very important. Of course, I have a risk, moderate to high risk. Then what I have to do? Then the question is, sorry, the answer is very simple. You have to improve your ability. Okay. Say for example, after this Puj earthquake, the function of Puj city drastically reduced. It functioned 100%, drastically reduced after the hazard earthquake. Then slowly the city like use their coping capacity, use their like assistance from different organizations, and they like came back. Okay, whether they came back to the same level or higher level or lower level, that determine our resilience. Resilience is our ability. Okay, within some stipulated time. Say for example, if you take Hiroshima and Nagasaki like bomb event, okay, after this Hiroshima and Nagasaki like attack, nuclear bomb attack, their functioning is reduced drastically, but they put their effort sincerely and came back higher than their original state of like functioning. Okay, you know that now the Japan is one of the like very developed countries, although it suffers a lot during the Second World War, okay, because their resilience, their ability. And many like African countries, if you look at, after hazard, after diseases, then they don't have a much coping capacity to like build themselves. Rather, they adapt what they could able to do it after coping capacity, then trying to like function very lower than their potential. Their potential is 100%, but level of their functioning now well below the 100%. Okay, this is the situation of many underdeveloped and developing countries, and this is the status of many developed countries. Okay, so we always to plan from this level to this level, for which we have to build back better all after every event. Okay, that's our like ultimate aim, and even global strategy as well. Sometimes we confuse disaster with emergency. Emergency, of course, it is a situation similar to disaster, but it requires immediate attention. Okay, so for example, a forest fire initially become an emergency only. Forest fire is a hazard, become an emergency. If the resources we put and we could able to control the forest fire, and the forest fire it's become an accident or emergency, that's all. It never becomes a disaster if we control. Okay. But in most of the cases, we put all our resources, but we could not able to control. We could not able to control or put off the forest fire. So what happened? It became a disaster. Like any event initially become an emergency only. Even flood also, if it is breaching immediately, no, it is called an hazard and emergency. That's all. But if it is beyond our like ability or capability to respond, and it become disaster, then we call it as a disaster. Even COVID also, you just imagine in like 2020 January itself, China may be controlled, no spread like outside the Wuhan. Okay, then we call it as a health emergency. That's all, no disaster. But we could not, okay, beyond our control, and become spread throughout and become a disaster. So this is the difference between emergency and disaster. Both are in same line, just our ability like determine. And of course, hazard also, it's not new. It's not from like other planets. It's our daily routine resources only sometimes become hazard. Even industrial like hazard, if you take, that industry is required for like for employment opportunity, no doubt about it. Say for example, Bhopal gas leak tragedy. It was the need of the hour, some like decades before, and after incident, then we like blame the thing, because earlier it considered as a resources and later become hazard or disaster. Okay, but all like accidents or like hazards initially give some manageable situation to us. It will disturb, but give us some scope to manage it. If we could not able to manage it and beyond our control, then only it become a disaster. Say for example, every year this Ganga like flooding, whether all the floods become disaster? No. In most of the cases, it is disturbing but manageable. But only few years, the rainfall is very high, and people could not able to like even control all the things. Then beyond their threshold, then only we call it as a flood. Even the droughts also, continuously rainfall is failed, the monsoon is failed. Initially, it is manageable with the help of groundwater resources or other resources, but still it is continuous, very worse, no rainfall at all, no drop of rainfall at all, then it become like a drought. Okay, so all hazards origin from normal manageable conditions only, holding under like manageable or keeping them beyond manageable, it's all our management. This is very important. And of course, the hazard can be broadly categorized into natural and human made. Our chief guest suggests even hybrid also. Sometimes we could find the combination of both natural and human made. For a sake of academic understanding, we would say natural and human made. Natural, if you talk about that, the most serious hazard and disaster in the world is a flood. Almost 30 to 40% of people alone affected by the flood. Okay, flood alone create 30 to 40% of loss every year, okay, which is very serious. And of course, you know that all the flooded areas are highly agricultural area and densely populated like a region, because we need water. Okay, so we need water, and the same water, if it is excess, become flood. So flood is very common and very common in like Asian setup, where population density also very high. Coastal regions, in addition to flood, experience one more severe hazard disaster, that is called a cyclone. Okay, because of course, especially the tropical regions, okay, the tropical coastal regions experience severe cyclones, which is killing people within a day or two. Okay, at least flood gives some warning time. Okay, you can do the things, but where a cyclone will immediately affect. But one wonder is, cyclone can be better monitored with the help of satellite technologies. Earlier it could not, but now we could able to understand, especially last 2 decades, our causalities to cyclones is very less, but still the economic loss is very high due to the cyclones, especially in coastal areas of tropical regions. Drought, it is very severe in developing and underdeveloped countries, okay? Especially in African and Asian regions, where many interior pockets, okay, especially away from river basins, away from major rivers. Major rivers are flooding, whereas between 2 major rivers, the problem is drought, no water. Okay, which is very slow onset disaster compared to any other. It won't kill people very immediately, but its effect will be prolonged. Okay, not like cyclone or flood can be recovered soonly, okay, but whereas recovering from a drought will take a decade sometimes. Earthquake, the hilly area, you know that hilly area, okay, as well as the regions which is having high tectonic activities. Our Earth is made up of brittle plates. Plates are moving, mobilizing one each other. Then due to this interaction or sudden release of energy, all constructions over that releasing energy area or epicenter will be collapsed and create a sudden havoc. Okay, will create chaos, okay, within a fraction of a second, and managing it's very difficult even, but the event is isolated or very discrete, not like a flood or cyclone or drought, which is continuously occur every year, whereas earthquake restricted to very limited area and restricted to very limited time. If the same earthquake happened beneath the earth surface, beneath the ocean surface, will create gigantic waves. We call it as a tsunami. In addition, with the cyclone, these coastal areas also exposed to tsunami, and of course, tsunami also very dangerous. And within an hour, will sweep the entire region, okay, without any resources. Landslide, it's a serious problem in hilly areas, especially where the people occupied hilly areas, okay, especially in India, Himalayan and the Western Ghat regions. Okay, of course, Western Ghat regions somehow very stabilized like a topography, matured topography, whereas Himalayan region is very immature, fragile, which is just a pile of sediments. You just imagine if you keep sand or like a silt or like a clay together for a height, then after rain, you know that which will easily like slide down because of its like what I say, stratigraphy. Okay, so due to that, this Engfold mountains facing serious issues of landslides, and of course we are constructing like houses or infrastructures over which all will be collapsed. These biological disasters are very danger before 1930s, and after 1930s, due to our medical developments, we controlled somehow the biological disasters, but the history repeats after around 100 years. Okay. After 100 years, again, these viruses know about how come back. Okay, and even after all our medical developments and etc. And of course, we witnessed this after 10 decades. Okay, this biological disaster we should not underestimate. Even if you take many dynasties, many like rulers, gigantic rulers, all collapsed, their kingdom collapsed, all because of the like biological disaster, biological hazards. Okay, and even all other we know by our naked eye, we can able to assess or understand it. But whereas these biological disasters are not like that. It is like invisible to us, but it kills like anything. Okay, so this is also very dangerous. In addition, we have many human-made disasters, especially after industrial revolution. So what ultimately we required, we have to manage it, because one side we need resources. Only resources become hazard become disaster. Without cyclone, you will not get rainfall. Okay. The same cyclone become hazard and become disaster. So one side it will be there throughout our like after history. On another side, we have to manage. How to manage it? We have to manage it very systematically. And keep in mind that disaster cannot always be prevented. You can't stop it. Only few human-made disasters you can prevent it. Even biological disaster also you can't prevent it. You can give vaccination and everything. You can improve your like ability, not kill completely the virus. You can't do it. So disaster cannot always be prevented, but we can minimize the effects by putting our processes in very systematic manner. And keep in mind, disaster management is more than response and relief, but whereas still our government set up all oriented towards just offer assistance immediately after disaster and forget about it. Okay, it's not about even our we human citizens as well. Immediately after earthquake or cyclone or like tsunami, we offer our assistance. We are giving a fund to CARES, CMRPM CARES relief fund, and we are like providing many like materials and etc. But after sometimes we forget. Okay, say for example, Chennai flood 2015, people suffered a lot. Okay, more than 30% of the city collapsed. This and people responded well. So tackle the problem during the crisis. After that, we forget. We don't bother about. After like a disaster, everyone blamed about the drainage system occupation and this, that, etc. and encroachment and etc. But after that, no one rising okay, until the next disaster. This is our strategy, but we should not. Okay? We should always assess the risk for managing the disaster future. Look at this figure, you know that from 1900 to 20, disasters are on rise. Okay? Although it looked like the number of disasters are reduced annually, but if you look at the affected people affected, and if you look at the damage, it is increasing. Okay, so we reduce the number of events by putting our like management, but even we reduced the deaths also. Okay, initially until 1930s, all these biological disasters killed lakhs and lakhs of people. We reduced after that, but the economic like loss and hazard. This is risk data platform. India, especially this Ganges Plain and this northeast India and Himalayan terrain and coastal parts of India and like coastal cities, consider very high multi-hazard. We have to definitely take the matter seriously. And of course, we can't control the hazard. I told, only thing is that we can reduce the exposure, we can improve the resistance and improve the resilience. These three are very important: reducing exposure, improving resistance and resilience. Resilience, it's nothing but the kickoff. And of course, you know that only generally the poor who tend to suffer the worst. So we have to improve the capacity of people to tackle the disaster rather than being like some financial assistance after disaster. Before disaster, we have to ask this, give them a proper okay, and proper resources to tackle the problem. Then only we can reduce the impact. It required very systematic manage risk assessment. This information, you can say that this, if there is no people exposed to hazard, no disaster. Okay. When people exposed to hazard, vulnerability is exposed, you will definitely have a disaster. Okay. This can be minimized if you go to any production. If you are staying here and hitting you, definitely you have a higher risk. But if you have a capacity, you can do prevent. You can stop falling this stone down. Okay. Or if you could not able to control hazard, you protect yourself at least. Okay. Like this, you can protect yourself. So you can mitigate the effects. Definitely there will be a effect, but at least you can protect yourself. Or you don't both the things. What you can do at preparedness. Okay. It's what our ancestors did. The ancestors not controlled all the disasters. What their management strategy is just a preparedness, community preparedness. They never expect king will do the things or government will do the things. Rather, they themselves identified what they have in each or necessity. Only they prepared themselves control the disaster. Okay. So this disaster required kind of systematic management for which risk assessment is very, very important. Okay. This assessment can be done systematically, because if you are requesting for risk assessment and preparedness prevention, to 7 a post disaster damage. Okay, so better invest before the for disaster risk assessment important. For this disaster risk assessment, satellite technologies, GIS and GPS, all these systems are very important, because it provides a system to which you are able to understand which area going affected and what community you have. And they have a proper communication system. You can inform when is approaching. Okay, it will be reach your place time accurately. If you know the people, then people will safeguard themselves. Even for flood also, flood monitoring, it is like a discharge. You can downstream people so that they will prepare themselves. Kind of early warning systems can be used. And of course, for which geomorphologics major role. And geoinformatics also play a major role to map all our hazard areas. Say, for example, this is cyclone tracks. Okay. This is the earthquake. This is the tsunami region. So, like to map or mapping guns, able to understand where you have hazard. This is what I did consultancy work to a Karur district station for effective management of flood. So we modeled which are all villages prone to flood, putting all resources throughout a district. The doctor have these resources with him, and he mobilizes the resources during a month. Just go and keep monitoring villages, because it has more risk than the other regions. These are all very dry regions. You could not find any flood. Likewise, this region free from flood, but this region, the same region, encountering here a drought assistance or crop planning, contingency planning need to be first, for which again we can use this. For ongoing support multi-hazard assessment of people Tamil Nadu. If you look at floods, droughts, and earthquakes, and found northern kinds of Tamil Nadu have more a cyclone impact and exposure compared to the southern counterpart, but the southern counterpart have a drought. Okay. So accordingly, we have our coping capacity strategies, for which this kind of assessment are very important. It should not just here and there assessment, rather we have to continue it, and we have to demarcate. These are all the regions to the maximum to be affected by tsunami. Just demarcate. These are all the regions maximum going to be affected by, say for example, this one. These are all the typical cyclone intensity. We have to make a zonation, and accordingly we have to do a development plan. Zonation is very important. This is another our study of Kaveri Basin for a zonation landslide. Okay. Which part of the basin, which part of this is Tamil Nadu and certain Kerala part also, there of this southern is prone to earthquakes or landslide. We can model it with the help of different techniques, and you can validate with the ground information, and you can give this information administrators better management. Of course, not only you can do more sophisticated information system. You can model, say for example, this is 2004 tsunami. You can able to understand at what time it will reach, but thing is that we don't have a system at the time. Now we have. So once we have such kind of systems, even there is a breach in which area will be affected, that you can model it, and accordingly you can prepare a warning systems. So warning hazard modeling, it's very important for reducing disaster risk. Even vulnerability assessment, you can do it. Say for example, cyclone prone regions, and these are all the villages low-lying regions, okay, low-lying regions, and within which you can assess inventory the people who is have resources, because people are they can able to manage themselves even without any economic activities for a month. But whereas these people in poor conditions will suffer worst. So accordingly, you can make inventory and you can model. This is about the COVID. This also you can do it from where it is spreading and where it is spreading, and from where it is going. A stage, not now become ubiquitous things, but in earlier stage you can assess it, you can control it. Even we also assessed Karur district vulnerability aspects. Although we have hazard, flood hazard, but people exposure is whereas here people exposure is more for even drought, for even dengue disease. other man-made vulnerability, given a comprehensive multi-hazard vulnerability to the government, administrative. So they focus this region on all aspects of disaster risk. Like you can do damage assessment before disaster, after disaster. This is Indonesia, and this is Kerala flood. You can do impact assessment, how this disasters like creating impacts. Even you can do very real-time impact assessment also with the help of satellite technologies. So this is a first fire, severity, firing play, and of course, which is geoinformatics. Now, considered seriously in all United Nations program, because substantially reduce mortality, people affected, economic loss, and etc., and substantially increase better cooperations and better early warning systems and better disaster risk reduction information to the poor. All the things will not succeeded, will not be succeeded until the community joins their hands. No initiative attain success until we people proactively part in disaster risk assessment. So we have to put forward our to reduce the disaster risk. This is very much important. Expecting all of you to join your hands to build a society better and wider. With this small note, I just my presentation here, and the floor is open for any questions, discussion.
Thank you, sir. Today is our national webinar, and today's resource person, Dr. K. Balaswamy, has presented and highlighted overall globe how disaster affected and hazard all mankind and human beings on the planet through with the help of PPT and their best experience of research and presentation. Definitely enlightened our participants of this national webinar. Thank you, sir. Once again, now may I request President of this national webinar, the Principal Jizamata Education Society, Arts, Commerce, Science College, Nandurbar. May I request Dr. S.V. Devri, sir, please address your presidential of this program address. May I request Dr. S.V. Devri, sir, please address your notes of this national webinar. Devri, sir. May I request Dr. S.V. Devri, sir, please address your keynotes of presidential address of this national webinar.
Can you hearing me?
Sir, you are audible, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Desai, sir. Now, our today's national level webinars. Honorable Dr. B. Sir, Pro-Vice Chancellor, KBC NME Jalgaon. Resource person, my beloved Dr. K. Balasubramanian, our mentor, backbone, always supported to all of us, our chairman, Srimati Shobhatai More, Secretary Dr. Abhijit Dada More, and our Vice President Dr. Vikrantji More. Our IQAC team, Dr. H.M. Patil sir, Dr. M.B. Patil sir, Dr. Nandre sir, Dr. D.V. Sonone sir, Dr. A.B. Deshmukh sir, Khandare sir, Pandit sir, and Devil Karnal, and all the participants of today's this national webinar. Myself, Principal Dr. Satish Devre of Jizamata College, Nandu. Our college always organized the different type of such activities related social, educational, health, and environmental issues, and tried to find out remedy of problems. Today's national webinar is one of them, which is focused on the current burning issues and challenges in front of the world. That is nature and disaster. So we discussed IQAC, NSS, and student welfare team. Selected today's national webinar title Disaster Risk Management by the permission of Dr. Balsala. Today, our chief guest and research person has focused on last 3 decades, what happened and happening in the nature. Climate change, environmental imbalance, pandemic, COVID-19, flood, landsliding, biological disasters, all affected and hazard not only hurt and heated, but also destroyed the human life. Disaster is the national calamity, and the world had been facing it from existence of human. One nation blaming another, no one ready to accept the big risk of it. Even though it is global issue, no issues become challenge. This challenge for all of us to do or not to do. So today is my presidential pitch. I would like to conclude that disaster management is collective and coordinated effort. Everyone must take an active part in disaster management to reduce the damage to human life for future. I am confident that viewers will help to each other in natural calamity, as well as spreading awareness among the citizens of India. I will convey the message, remove the ego and become equal. Thank you.
Thank you. Very short but very sweet keynote address. Now, may I request VN Khandare sir, please express the vote of thanks of today's national webinar. VN Khandare sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. I am Vijay Khandare, ICOAC member of Jijamata College. Taking it as a pleasure to propose a vote of thanks on the behalf of organizing committee of this webinar and from Jijamata College. First of all, I am very much thankful and grateful to all the dignitary members of Jijamata Education Society, President ISAP Srimati Shobhatai More, Vice President Dr. Vikrantji More, Secretary of Jijamata Education Society Dr. Abhijit Dada More, for their continuous support. Their encouragement and guidance is the key to all our success. Thank you. Thank you very much. On the behalf of organizing committee and Jijamata College, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Chief Guest Dr. D.V. Pawar sir for inaugurating and expressing his thoughts. Thank you, sir, for your valuable time. Your presence to this webinar is very much grateful to us. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to thank resource person of today's webinar on this national level webinar disaster risk assessment, Dr. K. Balasubramanian. Sir has explained this topic in very simple language. His powerful presentation, definition of terms, images were very helpful to understand this topic. Sir has cleared many misunderstandings related disasters. We understood what is difference between emergency and disaster. And we have also we have understood many terms like hazards, type of hazards, vulnerability, high risk, low risk, resilience, disaster trends, etc. These terms are very useful to us, and this knowledge of this topic is very helpful in future and also useful in disaster management. Thank you, sir. On the behalf of organizing committee, I would like to thank dynamic personality of our college, acting principal Dr. S.V. Devre sir. Sir has played a huge role in arranging and the smooth conducting of this national level webinar. Sir is always energetic and enthusiastic and all time ready to help and solve all our problems. Thank you, sir. We all are very happy to have a leader like you. I wish we will be able to follow you continuously and be the one like you under your guidance. Thank you, sir. In the last, but not in the least, I would like to thank all the teaching and non-teaching staff of Jijamata College, students, and all other participants who has attended this webinar and helped in success of this national level webinar. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Now, I also like to thank organizing committee of this webinar, Dr. H.M. Patil sir, IQAC coordinator, Dr. Nandre sir, A.S. Desai sir, V.K. Pandit sir, Dr. A.B. Deshmukh sir, Dr. D.V. Sonone sir, for organizing this webinar and smooth conducting of this webinar. Thank you all of you. From the permission of President of Chairman of this webinar, I would like to say that this webinar is over. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
S. V. Devar, sir.
Thank you, V.N. Khandare sir. Now, the National Webinar of Disaster Risk Management Program is
Yes, sir.
successful. Thank you once again, all the participants and delegates and resource persons. This program is the permission of Dr. S. V. Devar sir.
Sir,
Thank you, sir.
yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Wait for 1 minute.
Okay.
Devar, sir, you are not audible.
I would like to thanks to all my 2011 Indian Institute of Dehradun Steel. Bala, Dr. Dileshwar Naik, now for this today's webinar, Dileshwar and Sumant also participate in this webinar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
That
for
time we
inviting
all
us.
2011 team people says Dr. Bal Subramaniam in Maharashtrian word. Bala means Sri Krishna. So I am very thankful to Dr. Bala for this today's webinar. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, President Ji. You are always our president.
Okay, Desai sir, continue. And
Okay.
Sir,
Okay, sir.
Mike.
I
dear
think
sir,
wants to express some opinions. Okay, please express your opinion, Sirji.
sir, it's a very nice seminar that has been delivered by Dr. Subramani sir. And we do have I am working in agriculture university, but it's a very nice presentation, and I suppose to know few about agriculture disasters, like flood is one of them and drought is one of them, and he has explained very nicely. And we are actually training mates during 2011 at Indian Institute of Remote Sensing. Deore sir, me, and Bala Subramanian sir, and another sir is presenting here also, already talked. So thank you very much, sir. Dear sir.
Thank you, Nayak.
And sir, with but the permission of chair, I just want to have some words. Sir, can I?
Sir, yes, sir. Sir, please.
Yes, sir. Sumant sir, please.
It's a matter of great pleasure to listen to the session by Dr. Bal Subramani sir. You have always been the source of inspiration for all of us, and a great president of our group is Dr. Devre sir, who has made it possible to arrange such kind of program by which we can interact and we can have exchange of our knowledge with us. I'm very much thankful to Dr. Bal Subramani sir for sharing your experiences and your research work with us on disaster management. Definitely, sir, these things will help us out not only for awareness program, but also for research work in our future endeavor. So I express my deep sense of gratitude to you and to Devre sir as well. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you
very much.
Thank you, sir.
Can we again plan
Definitely, sir. Definitely.
to get together at
Yes.
Dehradun for
Yes.
next session?
No, sir. At Nandurbar.
Okay, thank you, sir. Desai sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Today national webinar is very successful according to the views and feedbacks by online all the participants. There are most of participants want to express their views, but the lack of time, we have the limitation. So next time we will definitely organize 10 minutes of the remaining part of the any program. Please say, address them, express within 1 minute, they can opinion express. That is our happiest moments for us. And this is the feedback for the K. Balasubramanian sir. Definitely very happy because no one listen online feedback, Sirji. Thank you. So now, according to your permission and behalf of our organizing committee, this national webinar is over here. Thank you all of us once again, all the participants.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.